Today is February 13th, 2013, and I am in the office of Mr. Bill Ripp at Ames High School. Mr. Ripp is a retired administrator with many years of service in the Ames School District. Mr. Ripp, do I have your permission to talk to you today and record your voice and your picture?
You do, and if I have anything of value to say, why, I hope someone will gain from it.
Well, thank you. The first question is always a toughie. When and where were you born?
Well, the where is easy. I was born on a farm in Buffalo County, Nebraska. The when is more difficult because I was very young then, but I was born May 24th, 1936.
You grew up on a farm, but your family valued education and you went to college. Tell me about your college education.
Well, both of my parents had an 8th grade education. My mother went through 8th grade twice because she had a younger sister who was afraid to walk to school alone. But I graduated in 1954. The farming outlook was good, but I had a chance to go to college, and so I jumped on it. I could have been a happy farmer. My friends say that I would have been a failure farming because I was too particular. I would have spent too much time doing things that didn't bring in income. After I graduated from Ames High School, I went to St. John's Seminary in Little Rock, Arkansas, where I had a double major, Latin and philosophy, and an English minor. And then the following year, I went to the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and here I picked up my teaching endorsement and started a master's program, which I finished there in 1961. And then I came to Ames. 1961 was 2 years later after I came to Ames, because I finished it in the summer. Mm-hmm. Then I came to Ames and I did all of my administrative certification at Iowa State University.
Let's go back in the story just a little bit. Once you had graduated from college, and you were interested in teaching, nowadays there are certain ways that people acquire teaching jobs. But tell me how you got the job in the Ames School System.
It's rather long. You sure you want to hear it? I was probably in March or February or March, about this time of the year. I was taking a full load at the University of Nebraska Kearney, but I thought that maybe I should also look into getting a job for that fall, since I had never had a job. And I applied at 12 schools, 11 in Nebraska and 1 in Iowa. The one in Iowa intrigued me because it had a Latin opening, and that was the only one of the 12 that I did. It also had an English along with it, and since Latin was my major, why I was interested. But I was interviewing on campus, and one night about 7 o'clock, Walter Hetzel called me. And Walter had a very deep voice, a very good voice on the telephone. I diverge here a little bit. Walter Hetzel was also a lawyer, and that was very rare back in those days for a superintendent to be a lawyer. And he said, "We've received your request for an application, and we'd like for you to come out for an interview." And I said, "Well, I'm interviewing on campus. I don't really think I'm interested in going out of state. Have many relatives here, all my aunts and uncles and cousins, and I've been out of state for 4 years going to school, and I think I really want to stay in Nebraska." He said, "Well, I wish you'd consider it." So the next week came, same time, Walter Hetzel called. And he said, "This is Walter Hetzel, and I'm wondering what you decide." And I said, "Walt, I'm sorry. I haven't even thought about it since last week." He said, "Well, I wish you would." He says, "I'll call you at this time next week, and we'll talk." So next week he called the third time, the old third time is charm thing, and I did agree to come out for an interview. But I said, "Well, it's going to be difficult. I have a car ordered, which I don't have yet. I don't know what the bus schedule is." But anyway, we set up a time at 10 o'clock the following Saturday to come out. I got on a bus at Kearney, rode all night, got to the bus station in Ames where the Wells Fargo Bank is. Splashed a little water on my face, had probably a donut, I don't remember what. Walked a block to the old Ames High School, had my interview with Herb Adams. It was excellent. Herb at that time had difficulty walking because of a hip that was giving him problems, but he showed me everything in that building. Offered me a contract. I said, well, thank you. I've really enjoyed my time with you, but I don't think I'm ready to sign. And he said, well, yeah, we sure wish you would. And I said, well, no, I'm not ready to sign today. That was 12 o'clock. My bus went back to Kearney at 1 o'clock that afternoon, so I had an hour. Went back to the bus station, got a sandwich, got on the bus, and had a 9-hour ride home. While I was going home, I had a lot of time to think, had a seat all by myself, and I thought, what did I see about Ames High School that I didn't like? And I couldn't think of anything. I thought, I wonder how many other people they've interviewed. So I didn't any more than get home, and I called Herb Adams and said, send me the contract. So that's how I got to Ames.
That is a great story. Yeah. Well, Superintendent Hetzel must have seen something he really liked because he pursued you.
Well, I suppose I was a Latin major. Latin teachers were getting fewer already back in those days. Latin was in the Ames High curriculum almost from the beginning. And I'm very pleased. I told him several times before he died how pleased I was that he was persistent enough and how that had changed my life.
Did you have an opportunity to come back to Ames in that new car that you ordered?
Well, yes, I did. However, it came in May, and I got in. I hadn't been out except for the interview, so I had no place to stay. Loaded up my life's belongings in the back seat, which weren't great, mainly clothes and a few books. And I got to Ames, and I happened to go by St. Cecilia's Catholic Church on Lincoln Way. And so I pulled in and went into the rectory, and Father Ryan was there, and I said, Father, do you know of anybody that's renting out rooms? And he said, well, Magdalene Walsh is a parishioner, and she lives just over here on Grand, and she does. So I went over to 510 Grand, and of course she was home, and she had 2 rooms to rent, one with air conditioning, one without. And having grown up on the farm, I knew what without was like, so I took the room with air conditioning, and I lived there 2.5 years.
Would you mind me asking, and if you could remember, how much was rent?
Oh, it was pretty extravagant. $25 a month. And of course that included, well, there are no utilities. People back then didn't have phones, so we all used the same phone. An interesting thing, 3 of us lived up there. Our names were Will, Mel, and Bill. And whenever the phone rang and she'd holler up, we'd all answer because
it sounded the same.
They all sound the same coming up the stairs. Anyway, $25 a month, and I found out at the end of the first month my take-home pay was $287.50. I was making a $100 a month payment on my car, so that left me for $187.50, and I lived like a king back in those days.
Tell me about where you took your meals then.
Well, I generally had something in my room, pastry or something for breakfast. At Ames High School during the week, I supervised the cafeteria, so that was included with my, so I got a meal free. And then in the evening we'd go out, such places as Nice Wangers out on Welch Avenue, get a full meal, 85 cents, meal, beverage, dessert, dinner roll, the whole bit. Tony's Little Italy was on the west end of Main Street, and that summer he had started an outdoor area where you could eat outside. You could get a pizza and a pop for 80 or 85 cents, and then on weekends, just wherever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was eating well, but not spending much.
Tell me a little bit about some of your companions. Who did you go out to eat with? Were there lots of single men and women that you could enjoy camaraderie?
Well, during the week, the three of us, and occasionally there were four of us, we'd jump in somebody's car and we'd just all go together. It was an interesting group. One was working on his master's in chemical engineering at Iowa State. One who turned out to be our oldest daughter's godfather was a mechanical engineering student at Iowa State. And the third one was a carpenter working for, I think the name was Klingler. It was a big company out of Sioux City, and they built many of the buildings at Iowa State University. And just whoever car happened to be available, I would jump into it. Sometimes we would, just go out on our own. But generally, we went out as a group. Friday nights were more interesting for me. There were three female teachers that lived with Bob Hamilton on North, whatever street it was, North 4th or something, just south of was close to where the St. Cecilia's school was, and they rented the room upstairs. They took turns cooking by the week. One was a math teacher, one was an art teacher, and one was a school nurse. And they knew that I would eat anything. So on Friday nights, they would invite me over for dinner. I'd clean out the refrigerator for them. We'd go to the ball game, and then we'd go back and play bridge until 1 o'clock or something like that. That was pretty regular.
So your residence at this time when you first came to Ames was really quite close to the high school. I think that building stood where currently the World War II memorial is. Is that right?
That is correct. Maybe just a little north, but all that area. Yes, all I did was walk down the alley, and I went in the back door between the gym and the auditorium. It was wonderful.
Well, I know some things about schooling haven't changed much through the decades that you've been involved. I mean, there's children, there are schedules, there's learning, there's socializing, and all that sort of thing. But for those people who may not be familiar with what it was like in the 1950s, what did you do first when you walked into the school building? And tell me about did you have a teacher's lounge? Did you hang up your coat? And your equipment was probably a piece of chalk.
Well, I don't remember that we had keys for our rooms. We probably did, but I know we didn't have it for the outside door. We'd walk in, go to our room, and then go to the office. We all had a mailbox in the office, and everything was almost handled through the mailbox. We didn't have phones in our room, which was wonderful. And get ready for the day. Back then, classes started at 9, and school was over at 4. And there was an hour and 10 minutes lunch. The students that lived close by would go home for lunch if they wished. Others would eat in the cafeteria, and then we had organized activities in the gym for them after lunch. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I remember very vividly was there was a trampoline, and we had probably 6 or 8 or 10 who were very good on the trampoline. And it was a contest every noon. The first person up would do one move. The next person would have to do that plus add one. The third one would have to do those in that order plus add a third, and so on. And when you got down to about 6 or 7 or 8 moves, it got hard. And so there were a couple girls that were just as good as the boys. So that was interesting.
It's almost like playing horse, only basketball, right. Only it's on,
right.
On a trampoline. Right. Yeah.
And then we were all responsible to a certain extent for student behavior in the hallways. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're responsible for student behavior and so on in our classrooms.
Did you have lesson plans that you would turn into administration? How was that handled?
Oh, yes. Our lesson plans every Friday before we left had to be on the office, and they were back in our boxes on Monday morning. And I found the second year my lesson plans were much easier because I kept them from the year before, and adapted them a little bit from the year before. It's interesting. I thought my second year would really be an easy year of teaching because I'd made all these tests and so on. When it came to the second year, and I looked at those tests, some of them I thought, what was I trying to find out? And by the third year, I think I did have a good test, but I did a lot of revising the second year. You find out that when you're a student, you study for what you think the the instructor will ask. When you're an instructor, you learn all those little details that you didn't bother to learn in undergraduate school.
Let's also talk a little about your preparations. You were the Latin teacher, and you had several different levels of Latin you taught, and I think you also taught English when you first started as well?
I think I taught for 7 years before I went into the other field. The fewest preparations I ever had was 2, first year Latin and second year Latin. Generally I had 3, first year Latin, second year Latin, and an English 10. One thing I was proud about my teaching, and I hope I did a good job, was that I never gave a test without getting it back to the student the next class period. Sometimes it took a lot of midnight oil to get them done, but the reason we give tests is for students to learn, and they can't learn if they don't know what they missed, and I'm very proud of that. That's one thing that when I was evaluating teachers, that I would get complaints from students. We never gets the papers back to us, and
I can appreciate that, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Latin is a subject matter that is not, shall we say, maybe electric or exciting to some young people, but you always had a fun festival that kind of rewarded Latin students for sticking it out in a very rigorous discipline.
Well, every year in the spring, generally in May, when the weather was really nice, we had a Roman banquet. So we had, Ames High had students wearing sheets before it became popular in college. Roman banquet was interesting. You had to be in second year to attend. We selected 6 first-year students to be the slaves. The slaves wore tunics that came about to their knees and beckoned to every wish of the second-year ones. The boys almost always came in togas, which were white sheets. Girls often had a lot more, were more stylish. They may have pastels, pinks or blues or greens. And then I think I'm correct that the stores in Campus Town used to be open on Thursday nights until about 9 o'clock. Our banquet would end about 7 or 7:30. So then the Latin students would go shopping in Campus Town in their togas and so on. We had Ferguson's Bakery prepared the pig for us. We'd get the pig from the meat lab at Iowa State University, tell them we wanted about an 80-pound pig dressed for the oven, take it to Ferguson's, they would bake it for us, and then I, as
a Caesar
head of the banquet, would get the boar's head with an apple in its mouth. Most people, I think, would have been okay with it if they hadn't seen the pig's head. It was cut up in the kitchen by our slaves or by my wife or by somebody. But that was one of the highlights.
And you did that for all 7 years that you were teaching Latin?
Yes, right.
Mm-hmm. And did you think that the students that you had were smart, clever, they were sharp?
Well, if you cannot be a successful teacher at Ames High School, it's your problem. Education is highly valued in Ames. Students come to Ames High with the motivation it takes to be successful. They've seen what education can do for their parents, and they would like to have that type of style of life on their own. Mm-hmm. So I found them well motivated, and they are intelligent. I always really felt happy that I wasn't competing with them. that I had the maturity and so on. And it was their first time through. I only had a third-year Latin class once. 12 students, 10 of them were National Merit finalists. And
My goodness.
I'd prepare a lesson for them that I'd think would take 45 minutes. We were done with 20 or 25. They would do the next day's lesson before they left class. Yes, brilliant.
Smart and well-disciplined.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they went on to be, well, for instance, Kitty Kelly went on to, got a doctorate in classics. And then after she had taught for a number of years, she went back to law school and became a lawyer, Judge Kelly's daughter. Charlie Bruner ended up in the Senate in the state of Iowa. Several of them became physicians and so on. So yes, brilliant.
We were talking a little bit about where you taught and what your classroom was like. And at the time that you came to Ames, there was a crunch for schoolrooms. I mean, children were being taught in different nooks and crannies. So can you tell me, did you always teach at the high school?
Well, that is one of the questions I didn't ask when I was being interviewed, because all we saw was Ames High School, and I assumed I'd be teaching in Ames High School. So I was a little surprised when I came that I ended up teaching in the First Christian Church north across the street. All of the foreign languages were over there, so I wasn't there alone. German, French, Spanish, and Latin. In the first 4 years in Ames, I taught in 3 different buildings. The first year at the church, the next 2 years in the school, and then, of course, the 4th year up at the Unit 1 at Ames High School, the new Ames High School.
Tell me a little bit about the Courtyard at Ames High.
Okay, my class overlooked the Courtyard. If you've ever thought of hallowed ground, I think the Courtyard was hallowed ground. I never saw anybody out there during the day. We had wanted to have a Roman banquet out there, and I think that was nixed. They must have mowed it weekends or after hours. On my window ledge, every spring, well, of course I was only there 2 years, but both springs, a robin built a nest. And we'd keep the blinds closed and watch, the little ones hatch and fly away. Mm-hmm. But it was very attractive, well groomed, but no paths and benches to sit on. It was, like I said, I think it was hallowed ground.
Well, we were also talking a little bit about a typical day, and I'm sure that administrators realized that Mr. Ripp, in addition to being a good teacher, would probably be good with helping students with extracurricular activities. And I think you were involved with the fire squad?
Well, yes. In retirement, I have a hard time of saying no, and that hasn't changed from when I went into education. I'm a person that likes to be busy. I like to be with people. The fire squad was a group of young men, and I forget how many were on it, but when they came in from Welch and Central, the principals would hand choose a group of young men and give us their names, and we'd invite them to be on the fire squad. The fire squad main duty was fire drills. We had a fire drill. They were sure that everybody was out of the building, that the windows were closed, the doors were closed, and so on. They also made reports to the advisors of conduct that they did not think was appropriate in the hallway, like a boy and a girl holding hands, maybe even engaged in a hug or something. And looking back, that is hilarious. But they were, and back then...
But that was the time.
Yes. Back then, students dressed differently. They were in slacks and shirts, and they were, they looked like they could be going maybe even to church.
Tell me a little bit about when did you become the senior class
advisor?
Advisor, thank you. Couldn't come up with it.
Probably about my 3rd year.
Okay.
When I came to Ames, Everett Ritland, a dear friend who became a dear friend of mine, was my mentor. And I learned more from Everett Ritlin about dealing with people than I did in all my college courses. Student council was very important to me also. I suppose in high school I was involved in almost every activity. And I was very interested in committees having an assignment and getting the job done. Some committees are social, and I think that student council, I felt the same way about faculty meetings. You know, if you could do a faculty meeting and accomplish your goal in 20 minutes, so what? Do it. But there's a lot of other things that go on in faculty meetings. Anyway, I became student council advisor and had that for a number of years, and then I got out of it for a while, and the people who took it over were having problems with it, so they said, well, you come back and shape up student council again, which I did for a few years, and then I gave it to somebody else. But I never did get rid of senior senate. Get rid might not be a good word. I had a wonderful, wonderful assistant, Grace Bowski, and she and I divided the responsibilities. She was a marvelous person to work with. She was a great teacher. And so working with the senior senate was never a job. It's always something I enjoyed.
On a more serious level, of course, you got your accreditation to be a counselor and later on to be an administrator. Teachers see a wide range of behaviors. And through your long tenure as a teacher and administrator at Ames High, there have probably been some local crises and some national crises that you saw reflected in the children's faces, or I should say students' faces, and how they might have responded. Tell me a little bit about maybe a couple instances of what you observed in your career regarding that.
The most vivid picture I have, which I will never forget, was the day John F. Kennedy was shot. Everett Ritlin came on the intercom and said the president had been shot, and that was around noon. And then it came on later, a couple hours later, and said that he had indeed died. And the Ames High School was like a morgue. Nobody was saying anything. People were crying. They were meeting each other in the hallway and not even, seeing them. That was the most traumatic one. The others that were hard, we've had a number of suicides during my tenure there, and you always ask why. We've had a drowning in the pool. That was a very traumatic thing. Probably car accidents, several of those.
Are any of them teaching moments?
I think they're all teaching moments. Some whys cannot be answered. But I think you can tell them this is one of the reasons why we need to live each day fully and to its best. And, the reason that they call today the present it is a present, because we don't know if we're going to get another day. And I think every one of them.
It's pretty hard for teenagers to understand that, because they really don't have a concept at that point.
They're immortal. They're going to live forever. I used to tell them at the last meeting I'd have with them in the spring, we'd meet with the senior class, and I would say, now after you graduate, I hope you will come back to your class reunions and stay involved with the school, because 3 to 5 of you will probably not live to see your first class reunion in 10 years. And they think, that's not true. Well, you look at the 10-year reunions, and almost always 3 to 5 are dead. A traffic accident, at one time it was military, cancer, a variety of things.
Right. And in the background, people who might be watching or listening to this, there's a wonderful hubbub of an office next to you. So I want people that are watching and listening to know that there's lively activity at this high school. It's vital, it's vibrant, and that's the extra sound that we hear. So speaking of liveliness, I mean, there's two masks, of course,
Yes.
for theater. The sad, which we've talked about a little bit, but the lively and the ones that bring smiles to your face. And I hope you might talk to me a little bit about senior class pranks.
Every year, Ralph Farrar and I would meet with the senior class about the 1st of May and say, we know that, you're anxious to get graduated and so on, but we hope that you won't do anything to embarrass your parents between now and then. And then I'd talk to them about senior pranks and vandalism. I said a senior prank is something that's clever, but doesn't take any time or money to clean up or to fix after it's done. And I have about 3 that I might mention, 2 that happened at Ames High School. The 3rd one didn't, and I don't remember where it happened, but it did happen. We came to school, I think it was the seniors' last day. There must have been 100 for sale signs out in front of Ames High School. We called the realtors and said, we have no idea, where your signs go, but if they're missing, they're up here in front of the school. I thought that was clever, and so did the students. Another one, I came to school, walked in the lobby, and there was a whole line of kids, and they had a keg going. And so I got my cup, and I got in line, and it was apple cider. It was very good. Now, the 3rd one I find really funny. During the night, and I don't remember where this goes, during the night, the students brought over 3 goats and released them in the school and numbered them 1, 2, and 4. The administration spent a good deal of time trying to find number 3.
That is really funny.
I wish I had thought of that. Another thing,
Please go ahead.
This is along back, Ames High, the Ames schools were founded in 1867. And almost from the beginning, the district hired 3 people on Halloween night to guard the school. So that's something that has been going on for a lot of years. The first graduating class from Ames was 1878, 3 guys and 1 girl. 1879, no graduates. Then in 1880 and 81, there were 11, all girls, 5 one year and 6 the next. So the boys were going into the work world and the girls were getting an education. There was some agreement worked out back then with Iowa State University where students could go out there after their sophomore year. And then also a little later on, it was worked out that if you finished grade 12 in Ames High, you could go to Iowa State as a sophomore.
They were well prepared.
Yes. Anyway, so those were the pranks that I found clever.
There's one that I remember, and I don't know for sure if it involved you or not, but I would guess it you might be because you were the administrator handing out the diplomas, that somehow the seniors throughout the weeks coming up to graduation had each taken a spoon from the cafeteria. Does this sound familiar to you?
Yes, I was involved.
Okay.
During the years, the senior class paid for a number of forks and spoons. Well, if each senior took a spoon, there was 300 spoons, and we would tell when they figured out what it was, to count their silverware, and the senior class would replace it. So instead of being able to use their money for their first reunion or whatever, they bought spoons and they bought forks and maybe even salt and pepper shakers. I don't know.
But the class that I'm thinking of not only had taken the spoons, but when they went up to get their diploma, they shook your hand and gave you a spoon.
The year I retired in 1995, I was the one that was at the bottom of the stage, making sure that they were going across in the right order and so on. And they would shake hands with me, and I ended up with a pocket full of silver dollars.
Oh, now that was a nice one.
That was nice. A few marbles. One year they handed out something that I'm not going to.
Inappropriate.
They were very inappropriate.
Something was inappropriate. There was one other class prank that I can think of, and I'm not sure that you would have even known about it. It might have gotten handled before you even saw it, but it was the class of 1969, and there were two swimmers, and they had sewn 5 or 6 huge double bed sheets that were white together, and they painted 69 on it, and they stretched it taut over the swimming pool roof. And the swimming pool roof was white.
Yes.
And so when people drove up, they thought they had graffitied the...
I remember that. And then there were times when they didn't do it on the sheet, and then we had to repaint the dome. I was thinking of a little more on vandalism. We had students that had sprayed some obscenities on the back of the school on the brick. And so we, I don't know if we rented one or we had a sandblaster in the district, had them bring it over, had the custodian go out and sandblast them. Well, he followed the letters rather than blocking it out. And so what we did is then we had the message on the back, only it was nicely
Nicely clean.
nicely clean. So we had to explain to him that maybe he needed to
block it out. That's good. Well, do you think perhaps you come close to being the longest tenured teacher in the Ames School System, at least teaching at Ames High?
I'm not sure where you should cut my tenure off.
I know you're still working and volunteering.
I
But
retired in '95, and 18 years later, I'm still here. I have an office. I have a key to the building. I give tours in the summer and so on. I would say that I have an equal in that. Marilyn Hanson, who retired about 10 years or 12 years after I did, is still helping in the math learning center. But yes, we too would be, and we both feel the same about Ames High School. We both love Ames High School. It was our first job, and she happened to be one of the teachers that I helped clean out her refrigerator and so on back in my younger days.
so if I remember right, you came in the middle 1950s. 59, late 59, and then you retired in 95, and you're still with the Ames High School alumni representative and working here.
The reason the Alumni Association is important to me is that Ron Rice in 1989 asked me to start an alumni association. He hired a consultant, Ken Grounds from Minnesota, I believe, and he worked with the Ames Education Foundation and the Ames High School Alumni Association. So as founder and director and now editor of the newsletter and so on, I still have a big interest in Ames High School.
So reflect on your career and think about what you'd like to tell me about that.
Well, if it hadn't been for Walter Hetzel, I probably would have stayed in Nebraska. I would have gotten into coaching, I imagine, because I was very active in athletics, and I probably wouldn't have gone the administration route. But I would not have known what I missed in Iowa. Looking back, Ames High School and Ames, the city of Ames, has been a perfect place to raise a family. Our 5 children graduated from Ames High. All 4 of the girls were cheerleaders, so I've spent a lot of time with cheerleaders. Our son was more involved in music. He played the trumpet, was in every band, I guess it was up here. And Ames High School has just been a marvelous place. It's been a career. In the 36 years I was here, except for a couple surgeries, I doubt that I missed 6 days of school. There were
That's
probably a
commendable.
There were probably a few days that maybe I should have stayed home, but since I wasn't in the classroom and infecting groups of 30, I'd come and you get up, you take a shower, and you get involved in your activities, and you start feeling better. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I can't think of a day when I dreaded coming to work. I loved it till the end, and I think that's the time to retire, when you still like students and you still like your job.
Indeed. I always give people at the end of our conversation a chance to, are there any stories about the school system that you'd like to have on the record? Of course, I'm focusing maybe on the early careers, like 1950s and 1960s, because those are slipping from people's memory. But if there's any other story or information you'd like to tell me, I'd love to hear it.
I might want to say something about the staff. I think when I came to Ames High, as far as the high school staff, I don't know that the Ames High staff was second to anybody. Back in those days, when you went into education, you planned on being in it for a career. Now, some people go into it saying, well, if it doesn't work out, well, I'll go do something else. It never occurred to me when I came to Ames High that I would not end up at Ames High. Another thing, I had opportunities to leave to be an administrator elsewhere. I could never sell myself and my family on that should be what I should do. One of them was in Rochester, Minnesota. One was in Des Moines, even Marshalltown, shows of interest. But and they were big rivals. I'm not sure that I would have fit in at Marshalltown because I'm a true little cyclone.
Well, Mr. Ripp, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with Ames Historical Society, and thank you for your service to Ames.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. To do this. It's been a pleasure to be in Ames.